With the authority of the Council of Griffith University, I shall now confer the degree of Doctor of the University. I call upon our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Roy Webb, to make this presentation.
Deputy Chancellor, the Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Dr. Eric Donaldson. Born in Cloncurry, Queensland, Eric Donaldson has continued a long family tradition of service to medicine and aviation. His father was the original pilot for the Flying Doctor Service when it was established in Cloncurry in 1928. Eric Donaldson graduated from the University of Queensland with a degree in psychology in 1957. His search for a university which combined both flying and medical training led him to the University of Glasgow, where he completed the first 3 years of a medical course. He subsequently returned to Australia and completed the MBBS degrees at the University of Melbourne. After serving as a resident medical officer at Maryborough Base Hospital in 1964, he was appointed as a lecturer and teaching registrar at the University of Queensland for a period of 4 years. He then joined the Australian Army, where he combined his commitment to flying with his medical career. Serving as a medical officer during the Vietnam War, he was responsible for providing medical support and for the extraction and care of servicemen in operational situations. He subsequently completed postgraduate training in aviation medicine at the Institute of Aviation Medicine, Farnborough, in the UK, and returned to Australia, where he became the Senior Medical Officer, Army Aviation Centre at Oakey. In this role, he became the leader of a dedicated group of doctors who were responsible for developing protocols and procedures for a wide range of activities which involved aviation and medicine. After his career in the Army, Dr. Donaldson was appointed as Aviation Medicine Director for Qantas in 1989. In this position, he developed all protocols currently in use on both domestic and international flights, including onboard first aid safety procedures and protocols for the transport of sick and injured patients. He introduced and supervised the use of semi-automatic defibrillators and developed diagnostic and treatment procedures which could be applied during a cardiovascular emergency. As a recognised world leader in the field of aviation medicine, Dr. Donaldson has made profound contributions to his profession. He served as Aviation Medical Examiner for the Civil Aviation Authority from 1974 to 1994, as well as serving as an Aviation Medicine Advisor and Consultant for the Army. He has held many prestigious national and international positions, including Vice President of the Aerospace Medical Association, Chair of the Committee for the 36th Congress of the International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine, Secretary of the International Aviation Medical Directors Advisory Council, and later its Chairman, and President of the Airline Medical Directors Association. Dr. Donaldson has also made significant contributions to the higher education sector as a visiting lecturer in aviation and aviation physiology at numerous Australian universities, including Griffith. He is a key member of the committee to establish a Griffith Institute of Aerospace Medicine Research, which will be the only such institute in the Southern Hemisphere. Among many honours, Dr. Donaldson has received the Harkness Medal for Service to the Royal Australian Army Medical Corps in 1979 and was named an Honorary Life Member of the Society of the United States Army Flight Surgeons in 1982. More recently, he was awarded the Howard K. Edwards Memorial Award for the outstanding practice of aviation medicine pertaining to professional airline pilots of the Aerospace Medical Association, and was also presented with the Boothby Edwards Award for his contributions to the promotion of health and the prevention of disease in professional airline pilots. He is a Foundation Fellow of the Australian College of Occupational Medicine, a Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, a Fellow of the Aerospace Medical Association, and a member of the International Academy of Aviation Space Medicine. Dr. Donaldson has contributed more than any other individual in Australia to setting standards and creating a vision for safety and best practice in aviation medicine in this country and around the world. It is especially fitting that the Council of Griffith University should honour Eric Donaldson in recognition of his distinguished contributions to aviation medicine. Deputy Chancellor, it is with great pleasure that I present to you Eric Donaldson for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
It gives me great pleasure to call upon our new Doctor of the University, Dr. Eric Donaldson, to deliver the occasional address.
Deputy Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, fellow graduates, guests, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to have received this degree and to have become thus a member of Griffith University. I must admit, however, that it was a bit embarrassing to stand there and with the Vice-Chancellor say those generous things about you. It'd be much better, it'd be much worse, I suppose, if he wasn't saying nice things. But I'm very grateful for the University of awarding me this degree. And I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to speak on this occasion, for the vibes that are coming up to me from the first rows here of the graduates of this university, their sense of achievement and the excitement about the future. It's almost palpable. And I congratulate you all most heartily. And I also congratulate those loved ones that are here with you who have made the sacrifice and have provided the encouragement over the years. Now, for this short address, I'd like to make a couple of observations from my field of aviation medicine, which I think probably have general relevance to most of us in our lives and in our careers. It's not advice. I'm fully aware that neither age nor post-nominals brings wisdom. These are just a couple of observations. Aviation medicine is concerned with the health and well-being of those who fly, of pilots and cabin crew and passengers. And of course, one of the things that really challenges their health and well-being, if you're on an aircraft, is a sudden, unexpected or uncontrolled contact with terrain. In other words, a crash. Now, fortunately, this is a very rare event. Flying these days is very safe. It's one of the safest modes of public transport. And if you are flying anywhere, the greatest risk is the transport to the airport in your car. However, we can always do things better. And what we're finding now and analysing the rare accidents that do occur, that they are now occurring because of what we call human factors. We used to talk about human error and before that pilot error, but there are a lot more people than pilot that make mistakes. And we find now that there are a whole chain of events that happens to produce an accident. And often at the very source of it is some small event, some circumstance, insignificant in itself, that sets in train this whole series of actions, which ends up in an event that we really didn't anticipate and didn't want. And if I could give you a couple of examples using some very well-known accidents of an aircraft that took off from New York flying to Portland, Oregon. And it was an uneventful flight, and they arrived just on dark, and the pilot called, "I can see the airport in sight." Then he put down his undercarriage. And on this aircraft, is a DC-9, there were 3 lights that say whether the aircraft is down and the undercarriage is locked. On this occasion, only one of the lights came on. Now, the manufacturers and the operators had made allowance for this, and there's a procedure that's carried out where you look on the wings because there are under indicators whether the undercarriage is down. They did this, and it seemed that everything was all right. But the captain was a very cautious gentleman. He was taught to be cautious, like many of us are. And so he made all arrangements in case the aircraft should land and the undercarriage should collapse and perhaps some of his passengers may be hurt. So they all practiced their crash positions. They talked about whether they should put their coats on to prevent a fire or not. And this went on while the aircraft had its undercarriage down and was circling at some distance from the airport. It went on for an hour. And during this time, the aircraft was burning fuel. Every now and then, the engineering officer would say the fuel's getting low, but after an hour and 8 minutes, they made an approach to the aircraft and they ran out of fuel 4 minutes or 4 miles from touchdown. And what was the cause of it? It was a bulb that cost about 50 cents. Small, insignificant item at the time. And that accident wasn't alone. There was a TriStar that went into Florida where the same thing happened, only this time the nose wheel wasn't shown down and locked, and the engineering officer was climbing around trying to find out whether the nose wheel was down. He knocked out of the autopilot out of control, and the aircraft actually descended into the Everglades. Very small things in themselves, but when you add the humans to it, you get a most unacceptable result. Now, I believe the same thing happens in most of your careers. I'm sure if I ask the people behind me or many of the people in front of me to name something that some small thing, insignificant at the time, that had changed the course of their careers, I'm sure most of them could. For me, I think of an event that happened when I was a lecturer in the Department of Anatomy. The professor at the time was a Professor Max Hickey, a famous professor, but he had every now and then he'd call his junior lecturers into his office and give them an impromptu examination, which was most disconcerting because you saw your future in the department rapidly disappearing as you performed at these meetings. But however, one day he called us all together and we all found a block of children's plasticine in front of us. And then he brought out of the sanctum sanctorum of a locked fridge some embryological models that were the only remaining copies, he said, because the originals had been destroyed in Cologne during the Allied bombing. And we were asked to model these embryological models, and so that the students could have the benefit of our models. Well, for anyone with my artistic bent, that was hopeless. So in an act of either desperation or frustration, I rolled out the plasticine and actually had the temerity to drape it over one of these models, and then took it off quickly, filled it with plaster of Paris and painted it, and it had somewhat of a resemblance to the original, much more so than my colleagues, I'd have to say, who persevered with the plasticine moulding. Now, that event changed the course of my life. I became then a chief modeller. Had nothing to do with the Department of Anatomy, I'd have to say, or what I went there for in the first place, but it was because of the professor's very kind and generous recommendations when I left the place that undoubtedly secured me my next appointment. And it leads me on to the next observation, that when I was given this job, of course, my blood turned cold because there was no way that I could use the technique I'd previously employed only for some of these very delicate little undercuts on some of these wax models. There was nobody in the department that could help. So I went out into visiting various university departments to see if I could find somebody that could give me a clue about this. And in the bowels of the dental school, I found somebody that nobody, of course, had ever thought of trying to mould wax models. But in this dental school, somebody said to me, "We'll learn to make jelly. And if you can get a jelly setting at a low enough temperature, you can put the mould in that, and then you can cut it out with pieces of string, pieces of cotton at least." Now, I'm very grateful to that technician that told me that, because from that beginning I was able to preserve the wax models, and once I had a firm model, of course, you could just go on making them with a commercial preparation. And they were sent to various anatomy departments, and as I say, the lesson from that was that there is so much experience waiting out there from your colleagues in unconnected disciplines when you have a complex problem. And when I think of the faculties that had students graduating here tonight and relate them to the problems of aviation accidents, it reinforces the point. If we can talk about law to begin with, what contribution of law made to aviation, to the prevention of aviation accidents? Well, quite a lot. You'd have to say that lawyers are ubiquitous. They seem to turn up everywhere. And as a matter of fact, there are more lawyers in airlines, certainly, than there are aviation medical practitioners. But they do form a very important service by setting the regulations that countries must obey, that airlines must obey, and upon which they must follow to fly. A recent example of this, of course, is the TCAS, which is the traffic collision avoidance system that now is mandatory in many countries for airlines. Now, this is a system where the two pilots are not aware that their aircraft are on a collision course. The aircraft, when they get close enough, will take over, having searched the transponder of the other aircraft on the conflicting course, will actually take over control and drive the aircraft. And that is saving accidents today. And we've got the lawyers to thank for putting that in position. Also, of course, when accidents happen, there are many lawyers on the scene. And one of the things they do, because the threat of litigation does mean to concentrate the mind on how important risk avoidance and safety procedures are in airlines. And then the engineers. I may be loosely using the word engineers, but the engineers, of course, have made a very large contribution to aviation safety. The jet engine in the 1960s made aircraft engines so much more reliable. And now we have the human factors engineers that in all sorts of operations in the cockpit. One of them, of course, is that just springs to mind. Many pilots were turning off warning lights or not actually seeing them when they came on, one or the other. And so the engineers decided that they would put warnings in terms of auditory warnings, so it wouldn't matter where you looked, you had to be warned. And this was a very good idea when it started, but it got a little bit out of control because, if your RPM was low, you'd get a whoop whoop. If you were running low on fuel, you'll get a dong dong dong. If you had an engine out, it'd go ding ding ding. And of course, this wouldn't do much for the state of mind of the pilot if these sounds starting to go off one after the other. In fact, there's a notorious aircraft that used to be a fighter aircraft that used to be flown by the German Air Force that had 15 different tones. And you can just imagine what it was like when all these tones started going off and the pilot was trying to address them. But I have it on good authority when they all went off together that it simply played Nearer My God to Thee. And the other people that we've had, of course, are the information and communication faculty. One of the first recorded accidents that happened here during the war was when an aircraft came over the fence and there was an American and an Australian flying. And they were at half flap, came over the fence, and the American said, "Spill the flap." To an Australian now, spill the flap meant get rid of it. To Americans, spill the flap meant put it down. So the pilot wanted the flap down, the first officer put it up, and they flew through the fence at the other end of Eagle Farm. That accident was actually put down to an international misunderstanding. But so many of, and what's happened then with information, with the information that pilots give, of course we have standard phrases. But of course if you put humans attached to this, it can still go wrong. Because there's the classic story of the aircraft trundling along the runway, and the pilot looks at the first officer and thinks he's a bit glum and says, "Cheer up." The first officer expecting to hear "gear up," so he puts up the undercarriage, and of course they were lucky to fly the aircraft off the ground. And this, of course, is this happens in your life as well. You've got to have your attention when directed when the communication is coming. Two gentlemen sitting outside on the veranda at the Queensland Club here, and one, there was a big pause in the conversation, and one said to the other, "Have you read Marx?" And the other said, "Yes, these cane chairs are hell, aren't they?" Which means that you've got to have your mind attuned to what the other fella is saying. And then the other group was the pure scientists. The first person that left the ground under a lighter-than-air machine was a doctor of sorts in 1783, but he also became the first casualty because his science wasn't too good in that he thought he'd get more lift out of his hot air plus hydrogen. The inevitable happened, and the balloon burnt, and unfortunately he was killed. But our science has guided us with aircraft very much since that time in what is possible with the atmosphere, how we get lift. The physicists and the chemists have played a very large part. And they're still playing a large part now with the human factors in trying to help us control stress. Many accidents happen because the people are stressed. After air shows, it's not uncommon for a very skilled pilot who has actually completed a very difficult aerobatic sequence to then make a wheels-up landing. And the only possible reason for this is that the stress reactions have just become too much and have directed his attention away from essentially what he was doing. And I'm sure you can relate to this as well. Since this is a university, I probably should use a Shakespearean illustration. And the one I'll use is from the first act of Macbeth. There was a situation where the electrician, who was an old actor but hadn't trodden the boards for a long time, was understudying Macbeth understudying Duncan, actually, in Shakespearean Macbeth. And you'll remember where the first act opens, the first scene opens, and there is Duncan standing with his thanes and the stage direction says, "Enter a bleeding captain." Duncan then turns to his thanes and says, "What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt, the newest state." Now, the worst thing happened for the electrician in the Duncan got sick. He had appendicitis on the opening night, and he had to practice and practice. What bloody man is that? What bloody man is that? And as the day went on, the anxiety level got more and more. It's a bit like giving an occasional address at a graduation ceremony. And so the curtain went up, and there was the electrician standing with his thanes. Entered the bleeding captain. He got halfway across the stage, and with a look of bewilderment, Duncan turned to his thanes and in the best Shakespearean diction said, "Who is this bastard?" So you can see how the stress, we need help with it. It happens in your lives, and it happens on board aircraft. So to get back to where I started, there are two observations that I think are relevant. One is that very small, insignificant at the time events may play a large part in your careers. And the other thing is that when you come to a complex problem, there is so much inspiration and help available out there from your colleagues in many and diverse disciplines. I wish you well.